Good day to you. This is Anagalactic on the 19th day of August 2025, a Tuesday here from Chico, California. Over here you'll see our new technology, a whiteboard, and we'll be using that to cover some of the hot topics in science. Yesterday I listed 40, and that's of course a completely arbitrary list. Well, you hope it's not completely arbitrary, or why would you make the list? The correct term, or a word that you could use to describe that as an example of a list of the hottest topics in science, is emblematic. Emblematic I've found to be a highly useful word. I wonder if perhaps you might find it useful too. I hope you now have it available in your vocabulary. An emblematic example is not meant to be exhaustive, but it's also meant to be non-trivial. So I essentially, from the top of my head, listed the 40 most important topics in science right now. That list could be extended to 100 or 1,000, or it could be reduced to 3, 2, or 1. What is the hottest topic in science? I wish to make a suggestion for our edification. So this is a legitimate scientific communicative process which is meant to impart useful information. So what's useful in science? This is a reflective question, sometimes called introspective. It's when, for instance, you're studying a subject, but then you turn your sights on how you're studying it. That is, what is your method? Or what are your methods and processes for getting whatever it is you want? That brings up our most important topic in a general, sometimes called abstract sense. This is introspective, examining science itself. The abstraction is the abstraction of science. What is it? We like definitions in science. It turns out, although I've attempted many times to define what science is, it is somewhat difficult to define because science covers so much territory. So depending on your axiomatic approach, which might be mechanical, or it might be deterministic, or it might be some other qualifier that limits the scope, we don't wish to do that here. We wish to embrace the concept of science in some formal approach, so we know what we're saying when we say science. Well, the question that could be asked, because this is somewhat intuitive, it's open, it's inductive, you go out into the cloud because you're dealing with something too abstract to narrow down easily. And what we want is efficiency towards some directed aim, a solution. Well, in order to get a solution to a problem, you need to be able to state the problem in a form which is answerable. And this goes to the scientific process, which depends on the scientific method in strict proof science. That's somewhat redundant. The way we were taught science in school is basically two different definitions that overlap, which may remind you of our main topic. Superposition, a new form of logic that was discovered in the 20th century. That will be the essential theme of my upcoming lectures, and it has become the dominant theme by a process of emergence, whether it's contrived by me or by those who think this way or not, is here immaterial because we're still exploring. So we want an approach to the question, what is science? What is it? I know from experience, both personal and having listened or read other scientific expositors, that is, scientists, who attempt to address this question very often near the beginning of their book, which may be on science in general. I think we've all been exposed to this line of reasoning that science is based on the scientific method. I believe that that is inarguable. However, you're leaving out a lot. For instance, is it a valid topic of scientific address, what I consider to be the most important and hottest topic on earth right now, which is the nation, or whatever it is, of Israel? Obviously dominating geopolitics and has been since 1948. That's quite a while. That's about 50 years plus another 25. We have 77 years of looking at Israel. Is that a legitimate topic for scientific discourse? I think the right way to answer that to satisfy anyone considering such a question from any point of view is that it is a logical question. And now you have to formulate some question which must be answerable, so it has to be in a certain form. Can we address Israel in some approachable format to decide somehow on a definition? What is it? That's usually the first question in a scientific probe of something that does not yet have an adequate definition for scientific discourse. What do we mean by that? Rational discourse. Okay, what does that mean? This is a recursive question, as all such questions of basis definitions goes. This is the normal situation that we always have to face, is how do you get your axiomatic basis for deciding how to answer such a question, which in this case is essentially about a country. It is a member of the United Nations. It was admitted, I believe, in 1948, but it wasn't long after that, if it was not exactly in 1948, that Israel, a brand new nation after World War II, was admitted to the League of Nations. And it's no longer called the League of Nations. That was a precursor to the United Nations. The United Nations is a well-known body, which I'm sure you've at least heard of, although you may not be able to define what it is. I would suggest here, for your sake and mine and anyone else considering such a high-level question, what is a country? It is simply one member of a group of bodies of governing people in the territory that they govern. A typical example would be a nation such as China, although there are two, and India, although it's always been divided basically in half, or a nation like Iran, which has two forms of its major religion, or Israel, which is obviously several things mixed into one, or the nations of Europe, each of which has some divided status among themselves, and of course the United States, the premier and emergent, a little less recent than Israel, but the United States is the second newest nation. And it was right after the appearance of the United States of America, a brand new country, based on European immigrants primarily, and then including a black population of imported slaves from Africa, which are still here. There's a decided black, as it's called, population in America. Also, there's been a huge influx of Oriental people and a decidedly significant influx of Mexican people. There has been an influx of Islam people as well, and Islam is now an established religion in the United States. Of course, it is not liked by the government. And so when you're talking about a country, you must divide your mind in order to consider two completely different definitions of what is a nation or country. You could say it's something that's a member of the United Nations. That's one acceptable definition. And so we're getting to a definition of what is the United Nations. But also we want to concentrate on our primary question: what is a country? What is a nation? Well, Israel is one of them, by any definition. And the United States is a nation by any definition of the word nation. A nation is a country with a government. And there is no known country ever, a larger or smaller aggregate of humans known as a society. The society probably has a culture that is somehow delimitable to that society. The unique aspects of that society comprise its culture, and that can overlap. Societies generally do not overlap, but their culture, each one, their cultures, overlap. So we're talking about human beings living. The ordinary conception of human life from generation to generation is divided into approximately 150, quite a ballpark figure, of separate nations. 150. Is there a dominant one? There might be. I just threw out that question to show how convolute can become the discussion if you let it. In rigorous science, we want to stick to the topic to answer a specific question. What is a nation? As you could probably imagine, or you already know, that is such a complicated question that you might as well give up. That you'll never be able to define what that entity is in any way. In science, we do not accept that answer. That is not true. Yes, you can. It's just that you may not have been able to thus far. Well, that means you're not trying very hard. You probably have a bugaboo, a superstition, or a hatred, and you will not consider certain lines of approach because you already know what you fear. And so you simply, as we say, will not go there. You must. If you're a scientist, you're not only free, which is a very positive characteristic of being a scientist. You're not bound to any superstition. You're not bound to anybody's decided format for anything, including propositional or mathematic logic. You do not have to accept anything that you've been told if you're a scientist. You have the right to question everything, anything, if you can use your logic system to prove what you say. That's the rub, is to be able to prove what you say. In this case, what is a nation? Now, I put this at the top of the list of scientific questions because of Israel and the United States. You could say, what about India? What about Iran? What about China? What about Canada, Australia, England, France, Italy, Russia, Argentina, the Tuvalu Islands, anywhere in Polynesia except for Hawaii, which is owned by the United States? How did that happen? Nations invade other cultures and societies. Whether they're a nation or not, they get taken over by imperialists. And the United States is imperialist. That's the definition of imperialism. Whatever you think about it. Drop your politics, drop your religion. You have now got to become rational. And that's not a maybe. That's not a take it or leave it. Without a rational approach to whatever question you're addressing, you're not approaching it correctly. You're not approaching it in the best way. That is called rationality. And I claim, with absolute proof behind me, that is one of the two subsystems of a human full-grown male. It is a man who uses rational logic, not a child. Although there have been some fairly precocious children. But when I say man, the first question that comes up in the common society, basically conduced by internet instantaneous communication and other mass media, whereby we all have a common perception, what the hell are you trying to pull by saying it's a man? Because of the feminist movement, which must be taken seriously. Are you excluding women? How would you answer that if you had to? What if you're used to saying man, and you always mean men and women, but now nobody understands you because your culture has changed? Whereby if you say man, you're going to be attacked. You're going to be challenged viciously, or vithithly if you say it white. How do you answer that very pertinent question? You may not like the question. It's like, obviously I mean men and women. That would be my answer, although not anymore. That's not sufficient. Then why did you say man? It's because of the convention with which I was raised. When we said man, or even just male, like God is masculine, well then the feminists have correctly asked, they have a right to ask, why is your deity masculine when half of all humans are female? It's because you're included if you're a female. That's how I was taught. Well, now you have to actually state it to avoid political embroilment. Because they will remember you, they'll get you. They'll come right back at you. Who is they? Legitimate questioners of that form of communication. Why do you keep saying man? Well, then you would have to define what you mean by your word. That's the recursion. Well, this one's simple, although it depends on something rather spooky. Because you might ask right away, although you have to have good timing for this, how come there's such a thing as women and men? It means both. Why is there male and female? Why would the universe make it so difficult, seemingly, for a man to even refer to his own kind as mankind? Shouldn't you always say both, female and male, so as not to leave anybody out? Yes, but can you do it by implication? You used to be able to. Not anymore. An exception has been raised, I believe correctly. What do you mean when you say mankind? The race of man or men? Are you being prejudicial against women? That is a reasonable question. And some men, they would have to be tortured in order to admit it, but deep down inside they know fuck well why they said man, men, God is male, masculine, chauvinist, just because men are superior to women. Is that true? No, it's not true. So that's a legitimate exception. How come? You don't say men and women. You could easily say so. No, you couldn't, because now you have to say both every time. Can't we just agree? No! We can't just agree. On your chauvinism? Absolutely not! So what the devil are you trying to pull with your masculine, chauvinist, oppressive, basically racism translated to sexuality? Why are the women treated inferiorly? I believe that's an adjective. In an inferior way, where they're not of the same level. They're lower. Is that right? Well, how would you disprove that? The easiest way is to open up the ancient book of Genesis to the very first chapter, where it says that the Creator created them male and female, and there is no preference. None. You're a created being? Well, there's two of you. And that's been proved in biological strict science. Even plants, and this was known by the 19th century, plants are sexual. They have two sexes. Well, that was a bit difficult for Victorian England to swallow whole. Even though the man talking about the plants was talking about plant sexuality, he had proved that the definition of a species requires male and female gametes. He didn't know they were gametes because microscopy had not drilled down far enough into the small world to discover sex cells. And I leave it for you to, as homework, to look up the year and state the year and the person who discovered the sex cell, of which there are two. An egg basically should be called a female sex cell, and a gamete, they're both collectively called gametes, either a male gamete or a female gamete. Well, those two gametes determine what a species is. So you tell me now, to answer one of the hottest topics that's been closed for close to 75 years, when I was being raised, the theory of speciation was still a theory. Today, right now, the theory of speciation is no longer stated as a theory. So you tell me, is that legitimate? No, it's not, for the same reason that when you say man, you could be misunderstood. If you say men and women, that solves that problem. But you might want to say women and men, and put the woman first for a change, because you're even-handed. Men and women are exactly equal. Are they? Are men and women exactly the same? Yes and no. Both are true. That is called superposition. It's called superpositional logic. When it's applied in the quantum world, it's called superpositional state. And superpositional state logic is now known. It was discovered in the 20th century. that superposition of yes and no is universal, and there is no possible question that can be formulated that has a yes-no answer as binary choice. They are always superpositional. Here's why. Answer this question for me. What is the goal of science? What is the goal of science? The goal, just one answer, not abstract, specific. To answer that question, or even to formulate that question, you would need to know the question. So you must formulate a question. This is called the beginning of the scientific method. That in order to answer rationally a question, the question must be formulated in rational format. You use the scientific method to decide your question. And that means it must be yes or no. It cannot be both. Well, now you've got a shitload of problems, because there is no possibility of ever formulating a question that has a strict yes or no as the solution. And that's the scientific method. Does the scientific method work? Yes and no. What's the hitch? Why can't we just say yes, it works? Tell me what Israel is. Define Israel. Well, define the goal of science. Define it. You must define it, or you can't ask a question. You can't ask a question about what you cannot define. So it's a catch-22. You have to have some idea of what you're asking about. Well, let me ask you another funny question that's been asked for centuries. What is the human race? What is it? Well, you know that's a big bag of worms, isn't it? What is the human race? There are two classes of answers to that. One has to do with our historical record going back to the beginning of human recorded history. We have one answer line. And now, as of the 19th century, right from jolly old, merry old England, we have a guy named Wallace, Alfred Russel Wallace. You know him as Charles Darwin. And the two names are basically equivalent because, as is very common in science, the discovery of a new answer for what is the human race was discovered by two men absolutely simultaneously. Wallace got it first. Darwin published first. Wallace published his extension that includes humans as part of the speciation, and then Darwin got jealous, wrote another book where humans are now species. That's the new and second theory to what is the human race. What is it? Well, when you ask what it is in the case of the human race, you have to go back to the beginning, to where humans began. Nobody has the slightest idea. And so there is no definition. None. Unless you accept two definitions. There's either no complete definition, or there are two definitions that are somehow to be merged in some relationship. That's where we're at. The most important question of all time that's ever been asked in science is, what is the human race? Because if you don't know what you are, You don't know anything about yourself except what you cannot prove. So what is the human race? There is no answer to that. Do you accept that? You'd better not. But there are two answers. One of them is called the theory of speciation, extended to include the human race. That's precisely correct. What is the other answer? The human race had to come from a man and a woman. Not 10 million, not 10 million years, not 8 billion humans. 2! Not 1! 2! So we begin with man and woman. Where did they come from? Because in order to speciate, particularly in the case of the anomalous species, whatever happened to change the species into a higher order species for emergent humankind, which is now a species, how did the species called the human race come about? We know mathematically, and nobody denies this, and yet everybody denies it by not saying it. Whatever happened to change the species, it had to be male and female. So stay tuned for some more good news from science. So stay tuned. Thank you for tuning in.